Hello everyone and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazell and this is Dev Dive, a show where I get a chance to talk to interesting game developers about their games, and today I'm joined by not one but two of the minds behind Skin Deep, the new physics-driven immersive sim space comedy ridiculous adventure game that we're here to talk about and explore the history behind and the design behind and the writing behind, because we have we have the writer and we have the designer of the game, so we're going to be going all over and talking about the story behind this game. So hopefully if you enjoy, you can go check out some of my other interviews, but I'm here to focus on Brendon Chung and Laura Michet, and we're here to talk about Skin Deep. Thank you very much both for joining me, sitting down in your office here and talking about the game.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. Quick clarification. We have a crew of designers, so I'm definitely not the only person doing it, but yeah.
Team effort, of course, as game development always is, but you're two of the people that helped bring this game to us, and we're going to talk about the roles that you played and the history behind this game. But I want quickly for you to introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little bit about what your job is in games and what you did to sort of get Skin Deep to the world.
Yeah, so I'm Brendon Chung. I am the founder of Blendo Games, a small game studio. Prior to this, I was in the AAA game world for a bit, and prior to that, I was in the modding world for a bit, making maps for Quake and Doom and Half-Life. And nowadays, for Blendo Games, I do a bunch of the art and design and programming, and we just released Skin Deep, and we really are happy with what people are doing with our weird thing.
Absolutely. And Laura, what about you?
I'm Laura Michet. I have been working in the games industry for around 14 years. I've worked almost my entire career for both big companies and very small teams at the same time. Currently, my day job is that I work at Heart Machine as a narrative director. But on nights and weekends for the last 4.5 years or so, I've been helping Brendon out with Skin Deep. On Skin Deep, I was doing some writing and narrative design. That's what I do for my job most of the time. I also have a history working in editorial roles at Riot Games and other studios.
So you're writer and narrative designer by day and writer and narrative designer by night.
Yeah, I think...
it's kind of a 24 hours of writing and narrative design.
One of the things that can keep you sane in games is if you have a project nobody can cancel, right?
Ah, okay.
So for most of my career, I've had something that I'm doing for a big company and then something that I'm doing for myself or for a small team that's a little more independent. I started working on this game with Brendon back when I still worked at Riot, and I had to go ahead from them to pursue these things on the side. And it's always good to have multiple different creative experiences for yourself in your life that can contrast and inform one another. So Skin Deep was that for me.
Yeah, very cool. And so one of you mentioned that this game's been in development for at least 4.5 years. Brendon, I guess go to you in terms of how this game sort of came up. Like, what was your original idea for it, and when did you have it? So how long has it been in production?
It really started because I had done a bunch of first-person things in the past. Games like the 30 Flights of Loving and Gravity Bone and Quadrilateral Cowboy. I grew up making first-person like mod mapping levels for Quake and Half-Life and Doom, so I have a great fondness for first-person things. I had never really like made just a straight-up action game. I think in the few plays some of our previous first-person stuff, they're kind of a more narrative-focused or more experimental. I grew up playing action first-person games, and I thought, I'd love to see what our take on that genre would be.
Leave your mark.
Yeah. Yeah, and so Skin Deep kind of came out of there. It officially started in 2018, but I was doing part-time on Skin Deep. I was helping a friend out with art on their game. And then in 2021 or 2020, one of those years, I went full-time on Skin Deep.
I think you went full-time in 2020, and then we sought a publisher through until 2021, which is kind of when production really kicked off.
That's right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. We got published by Annapurna, and then we kind of built up a small team to work on this one project together.
Yeah, that's actually one thing that I wanted to ask you about is this being a game that is published by Annapurna. Of course, they helped get the game to the world, but looking through your history with your games at Blendo, they've been self-published. They're put onto Steam, and you're the one doing that work. And so what pushed you to make that decision to choose a publisher for the first time for Blendo Games? And what sort of benefits did that give you as a team and as creator?
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up kind of working by myself, and then when I started Blendo Games, I would, either work by myself or have one or two collaborators. And something from my time working in the AAA world was there is something like kind of magical when you work with a crew of folks, people who are like very specialized in doing a thing, or having specific people do focus on specific parts of the game. And so the opportunity came about to have a game published by Annapurna, and we decided, this chance might not come again. We might as well, give it a shot and see how this goes. And it was a really great experience to, work with people who are really good at level design, and work with people who are really good at programming, and work with like a musician who's really good at doing music. There's something special about, bringing people together to use their superpowers together.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I'm excited to have you both here, because you both worked together on this game in a bunch of different capacities. I'm sure you were throwing back ideas all the time. But what I like about Skin Deep is that it is a very mechanical game. There's tons of different ideas and I think really innovative stuff that even as someone who plays a ton of games, I haven't really experienced before. But it also has a very strong narrative identity through its comedy, through its characters, through the writing and voice acting and visual style. And so everything comes together into this, totally just wacko package. It's crazy. I was stoned up this game. I was just laughing for like the first 30 minutes because I'm like, what are you guys doing here? This is nuts.
Yeah, we wanted to make something that was really slapstick and silly. But we also thought it would be funnier if the people in the story are completely emotionally earnest about everything that is happening to them at all times. So at the start of the project, we worked up kind of like a statement of narrative goals together, where we were going down like creating an is not statement about the game. What things is the story going to feel like? What things is the story not going to feel like? And from the beginning, we were like, this is silly and earnest. It is not ironic, and we want people to finish the story feeling like they kind of experienced a completely sincere cartoon. And I think we knocked it out. I think it was good.
Yeah.
We did what we wanted to do, and that's always a victory in games.
We never wink at the camera. We try to silly stuff happens, but they treat these silly things like very seriously and very earnestly, and not ironically.
Well, that's the great thing about the game is you're ostensibly doing Looney Tunes physics and Looney Tunes contraption concepts of all people's heads coming off and flushing things down the toilet and slipping on banana peels. You're right about it being cartoonish, but because it's also it's ostensibly a crime drama, right? This is like pirates and murder and backdoor deals and all this stuff. It also has this edge to it that I think it's an interesting contrast, and I'm curious for working on the narrative and the mechanical elements sort of in conversation. How did they inform one another? If you're coming up with an idea for a narrative concept, is that then fractaling into something that you come up with mechanics for, or is it the other way around?
Brendon had a really strong set of mechanical vibe goals for this game from the very beginning, and that was, I think, where we started. You kind of wanted to make Die Hard in space from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And that was sort of like a statement of intention that was really easy for me to follow.
That was the elevator pitch. They are our North Star of Die Hard.
Looney Tunes Die Hard in space.
Looney Tunes Die Hard in space, yeah.
And then for narrative, you had a couple goals for the narrative, but they were really slight and very open-ended.
Die Hard in outer space really was the idea. So that was kind of how the game was for a while.
And you had been talking to people about wanting to make Die Hard in space for a decade.
Yeah, it's a juicy idea, and we had some mechanics and some levels, some really rough blockouts of spaces you explore. But in terms of narrative, before Laura joined, there basically was the most loose premise of you're an insurance commando and frozen inside a box. That was kind of it.
You wanted the player to not be like a super murderer who was running around killing people. You wanted them to have a job, and the job was insurance commando.
Yeah.
You wanted the story to accommodate the fact that the pirates were not being killed. They were more being humiliated, right?
Mm-hmm. If you throw their head out into space, I don't know if they're coming back from that one.
Xena says she can go scoop everybody's heads up out of space.
Yeah.
And we do see where they end up at one point in the game.
Sure.
Yeah.
They're in a very high-tech orb. They're fine.
Yeah,
they're good.
Is the high-tech version of the orb in the convention scene?
Oh, right. There's a
There's an
convention
even
scene
higher
of
tech orb at one point in the game, which is blowing
Gotcha.
a little fan on them and giving them like a lemonade to sip while their head is
that's
disembodied
lovely.
in the orb. But yeah, you didn't want the pirates to be being murdered. You wanted them more to just be like destroyed and humiliated and disposed of.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything that we planned to be in the game when we created our first like outline of our goals ended up in there. We ended up like not cutting any major plot points or anything, but the one that you wanted to be in there was the telescope sequence.
Mm-hmm. Oh my god. I was on a Discord call when that happened, and I was just like, what is going on? I was like, what is happening? And they're like, what are you looking at? What is going on?
Brendon described the telescope sequence that he wanted in the game to me, and I was like, sick, absolutely, yeah, we can do that. But then you kind of left it open to me for almost everything else. So
Yeah.
I chose for the game to be kind of populated by characters from other Blendo games. So Brendon had previously created a gigantic list of all of the concepts in all of the Blendo games. So all the characters, all of the brand names, all of the locations, and just gave me a giant spreadsheet. And then I had previously played all of these games, so I went and I read through the spreadsheet and I picked out, oh yeah, we got to bring Choo Choo back. And man, I remember Nina Pasadena, that name is funny. I kind of sampled Blendo history for like some people that we could populate the game with. The first thing that I pitched back to you was the main premise of the game, which is, I mean, I guess we have to talk spoilers here because we're talking development.
Yeah. Is there a spoiler alert?
Well, now here's
Spoiler
the
alert.
If you want to, we can save that for a section at the end, so people can sit here and listen to 30 minutes about the design, and then we can get into like a little more narrative stuff.
You can cut out what I'm about to say and put it in the ending. The very first thing I
Sure.
pitched back to Brendon was, we can now return to a non-spoilers situation.
Excellent.
The next thing that we did was Brendon and I sat down together and we sort of talked through the entire game's worth of interactive gags. I've not done level design in my career, but I have played enough of Brendon's games and worked with enough artists and designers that I found it pretty enjoyable to just like talk through things from like his point of view in sort of like, what can you implement? What's an expensive gag for you to implement in Doom 3? What's a cheap and cool gag for you to implement? What are the craziest gags that we could get in here for like the least amount of effort? How many minutes of vignette scripting and animation do you think that we have the budget for in this production? Our original outline for the game actually includes the full list of vignettes that ended up in the final game with an estimated length for everyone, even down to
Gosh.
like, we were like, this one will take 5 minutes, this one will take 8 minutes. And we were like, not that far off. I think I overestimated how long some of the vignettes would be. I think they ended up being shorter. We were like both really talking about this from like a really practical sort of design implementation standpoint the entire time. I remember when you pitched me the telescope gag, I was like, can you do that in Tech 4? How will you do that in Tech 4? And he was just like, oh, trust me, I can do that.
Yeah.
And so every time we came up with a gag, the one of the first things that we did is we talked about like, not in a granular way, but in sort of a basic way of like, how could we actually execute on this narrative beat?
So kind of the general process was we came up with that outline of the entire game from start to finish, and then we had to implement it. The level designers and I would kind of go back and forth to kind of like come up with something that we thought would be interesting and how to fill in the details of the outline. And I would do storyboards for some sequences of kind of drawing out like little guys and arrows of what was going to happen. But yeah, I gotta credit Suzanne and Tynan for really, translating this into the game engine and filling out
They would also add additional visual gags as they were designing the level. So
Yeah.
Brendon and I would talk. We would come up with like an interactive idea for like what the scene is like. He storyboards it, And then when they're actually building the scene, they're like adding quite a substantial number of additional jokes. In the convention sequence, Suzanne created all of the jokes in the show floor area from scratch.
Wow. Okay.
At the end of the game, when Nina becomes very angry, it was Tynan's idea to have her field of view slowly fill up with blood. The number of visual gags in that sequence that came from Tynan rather than from Brendon and me is like huge. It's like almost all of them in that final sequence.
Yeah.
And so they would create this, and then they would send it back to us, and then I would rewrite the script to match what they had created.
Sure.
So there was this kind of like process where it would start with me, and then Brendon would validate it, and then Brendon would communicate it through comic panels, essentially, and then they would build it, and then we would reassess that, and then I would rewrite the script to match it.
It's a lot of back and forth. Because I think something like when you're building something out, you just suddenly like will see opportunities like, oh, okay, now that it exists in the game and we're seeing it, clearly we should do this joke.
Yeah, and so what is very cool about this very back and forth, everyone getting their fingers on everything process, is it seems like everyone was kind of on the same page. You all got a sense of humor, you've all got an idea of what the goal of this game is funneling to, and again, I want to talk about the cohesion between the comedic narrative, but also comedic gameplay. And so we talk about importance of comedy in the narrative, but what about comedy in the mechanical sense? When you're coming up with each of these interesting mechanics that you can screw around with in the environment, how important was it to you to make sure that they were funny, that they could sort of Looney Tunes style combo into one another and make these sort of elaborate, ridiculous sequences?
So I think one thing that was kind of nice is that kind of everyone who worked on the game is naturally funny. Like, I don't think anyone on the team like exclusively makes grim dark stuff. Like, we like when things have personality, we like when things have a little joke. I would actually kind of say that it would be kind of challenging for us to make a grim dark game, just because like that's not how like something we naturally gravitate to. But making things kind of like have a goof is just something that we kind of naturally lean toward. One of like the challenges of making a immersive sim game is that you got to make a lot of interesting choices of like, well, when this interacts with this, how do we want that to work, and how do we communicate that clearly to the player, and how do we like work within our limitations. And the one shortcut that we thought worked pretty well was, you know, how would a cartoon do this, or like how would a Looney Tunes do this? I think there's just a kind of a natural cultural understanding of how things would work in a cartoon, and so it kind of made sense. Like, well, the XYZ would happen in a cartoon, so let's give that a shot.
Do you have any examples of particular mechanics you implemented to sort of match that cartoon reality?
I think it was Tynan who suggested that skulls can be flushed down a toilet, which is not realistic.
Depends on how powerful a toilet is.
It's, yeah.
Use a little cartoon logic.
Exactly. Yeah. Once you go through that filter, it's like, well, obviously it should be flushed on a toilet. Yeah. I think just like giving yourself the permission to not be tied down by real world physics and embracing this specific perspective on logic really helped us a lot.
Yeah. Curious for both of you, what is the funniest thing you think you can do in Skin Deep? What's the thing that you consistently get the most laughs out of when you see either you do it or you see other people do it?
To me, I laugh at myself. Very frequently, I die right at the end of the mission, like 6 inches away from escaping, which is very funny to me. And usually the reason I got there is because I made a bunch of like extremely hubristic decisions. So I think it's very funny that you can go from feeling insanely powerful to completely overextended and about to die in like 30 seconds. A lot of the time that's because I'm like carrying a bazillion bombs and guns, and I put them all over the place very carefully, and then I like get targeted by a swordfish and I like try to dodge, and I like step on my own tripwire, and then like the entire universe explodes, and the room is just full of heads flying around laughing at me while I crawl on the ground. I think that's very funny. I also think it's funny that you can spit blood when you're in that state.
We have a system where when metal objects collide with metal things in the world, they make a little spark, and sparks will ignite flammable clouds and gases.
Of course.
One thing that happens is when you heal yourself, that you're pulling a piece of shrapnel out of your body, you will pluck it out and throw it into the air. But shrapnel is just made of metal, so when it hits the ground, it will make a little spark. And if it happens to be a little cloud nearby, then it'll ignite.
That's very interesting and dangerous. Good to know. Good to know.
The very first stream that we watched on Twitch, less than an hour after the game came out, we just clicked on some random streamer, and we clicked on it just in time to see them do this to themselves. They were healing a wound while standing inside a cloud of flammable gas, and then blew themselves up.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be honest. You guys might be one of the only games in which the heal action can.
Yeah. You have to get to a safe spot before you start plucking the bullets out. Sometimes when I pull bullets out of my body, I collect them and then I throw them to distract guards, which is great. If you want more throwable resources, just get yourself shot a bunch. Oh, another really funny thing you can do is when you're on the back of a pirate trying to smash them into things, if they're like about to die and you smash them into a heal thing on the wall, it will emit a cloud of heal gas and just heal them.
Okay.
Which is another oh no kind of moment that I find very funny.
We love the idea of the player character kind of being a hot mess. We think it's fun to be an anti-power fantasy, and you're kind of all over the place.
I have many times deliberately gotten myself impaled just to get the swordfish out of the room. But mostly what I'm trying to do is dodge out of the way so that they can stick in something and then I can get a giant sword and hit people with the sword. And I like how high stakes that is, and I can be like totally confident in my ability to dodge it, and then I like fail to dodge it, and now I'm walking around with like a gigantic sword sticking out of my head. It's great.
I'm also curious on the character writing process. In terms of developing not only Nina, but all of these pirates and cats that you're interacting with throughout the game. One thing that I think is interesting about them is that they each have their own like cartoonish character trope. They're all obsessed with something, and it's reflected in their design and their costume or whatever. And I'm curious for each of you if there's a character that you particularly love in this game. Well, one of the cats you get emails from, Nina herself, whatever. For me, I can't remember the character's name, but it's the one of the cats that Nina and this cat keep trading back and forth like cult classic movie recommendations.
Yeah, Trisha.
But my favorite part about it, I'm a huge movie buff. I graduated from college with a film studies degree, so I'm a gigantic jackass for movies. And so that comedy works for me very well. But my favorite part about it is that Nina can never watch any of them because she's like asleep for, basically the entire year. Like she's only awake for like 20 minutes at a time every few months, which I think is such a hilarious like narrative concept. I was like, oh yeah, sorry, I'm busy, but then you're busy for 10 months at a time.
We had some conversations about this very shortly before the end of development. I went back and replayed the game, and I noticed that we had accidentally set a bunch of those strings in the cryopods that say how long you've been asleep for to like way too long. It was like, you have been asleep for 3 months. So I was like, no, like it's got to be like 2 weeks every time, or Nina has 5 birthdays during this game. Like it's yeah. I really like the interplay between Trisha and Fortinbras, 2 of the cats, because during the game they start dating each other. And my friends Bruno and Kevin wrote those cats, and they coordinated that while they were writing those cats to add that secret subplot. I like Fortinbras's metal songs.
I have a fondness for the YA novelist cat, because when we were first talking about it, you said, like, Brendon, what if each cat had, like, a super specific personality, like a YA novelist who will send you excerpts of their YA novel. And I thought this was like, oh my god, absolutely. I do want to read a Little Cat's YA novel. Perfect.
I second guessed that multiple times during development, and Brendan was like, no, there has to be a cat who writes, like trashy YA novels. That cat was written by my buddy Mike, who is the head writer of The Onion. So we got some serious joke muscles in that cat. That cat is sort of describing where they are in their book writing process, and their book sounds like really unpleasant to read. It's a funny one.
Yeah, back to the design. This being an immersive sim, the level design is something I'm always fascinated with in immersive sim games, and making sure that everything is readable and explorable, and everything is useful, frankly. And I think you guys did a really good job at that. Of everything that is a bright color in this game or is a discrete level element does something, and you just have to find the way to combo things into it to make it interact. And so, what was the level design process like? How did you have to approach level design differently to account for all the wild, new, innovative ImSim physics mechanics that you ended up including in the game?
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of iteration. Tynan and Suzanne are like really, really talented level designers, and so they were able to find some really good solutions to making areas feel readable and to make it clear for like where the player can and cannot go, and figuring out the logic of how things unlock so that the player never gets like blocked in their progress or gets trapped in a weird situation. One thing that we were figuring out for quite a while was what we internally call the chaos cascade, which is everything talks to each other. So that things can take damage, things can get flown around, things can catch on fire and explode and stuff like that.
A lot of explosions, yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that was happening for quite a while was because they were talking to each other so much, it kind of causes cascade of events to happen of like this triggered that, and then that will trigger that, and then this will, like a bunch of dominoes just falling down on each other.
Suddenly a pirate you've never seen in a room you've never been in is dead.
They're just dead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, something happened here, but I don't know what.
Not dead, by the way. I want to make sure
you're right.
Die.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Their head is
We're all on the
merely...
same page. That's one of the core tenets of the game. How could you forget?
Yeah.
It's one thing for things to be reactive in really interesting ways, but it's another thing if like the player doesn't understand it, then would that work for the game? Like, if an interaction happens and no one sees it, like, does it really exist? Or, and so we had to go back and kind of make things more readable to the player, of kind of like clarifying what happened, kind of scaling back how chaotic it can be, or at least explaining what the chaos is, so players will know what happened. And so that's a big reason why the little like freeze frame thing comes down sometimes. Letterbox bars will kind of drop down, the world will pause, and little labels will appear of like, hey, this is a spark, and hey, this is a flammable cloud. Watch out, and then they'll explode after the freeze frame ends.
Sure, yeah. I really like that in terms of also matching this sort of cartoon or movie style thing, right? It's like, here's the thing, ding, and then we can move on to you see that a lot in movies, like especially in comedies. But on a design level, one of my favorite things that I think this is like one of my favorite small things I think this game does better than many others is the in-world labels for things that teach you how they work that you can then zoom in on, right? Every little object you can hold in your hand, there's lots of signs in the environment that you have this mechanic where you can just zoom in and read it on the different things that you're interacting with in the game. They all, like the banana has a label on it and the gun has a label on it. It's like, here's how you reload. And that is really crucial because there's a lot of different things you can pick up, and there's a lot of different things that they work in kind of similar ways, but slightly different. So you got to make sure that people aren't forgetting how things work. And that is one small key thing that I found really refreshing as I was going. I'm like, oh, how did this work? You know, I did the tutorial for that like 3 levels ago, but I haven't used it yet. You know, like that kind of thing of always being able to like reteach myself. Oh, that's how it works because the label's right there and I can just look at it.
Yeah, we were really happy with how that turned out. That was really fun to work on.
Brendan wrote almost all the labels.
Yes, so this kind of Venn diagrams really nicely, and like one circle is things that will work well for the game, and one circle is things Brendan loves to do, and like I love doing fictional labels and product stuff.
Yeah.
So it was such a blast to be able to do fictional products and labels, but also have it like help the player learn how to play the game. And I have a thing where sometimes if I see a label in a video game, I will just read it for hours. Like if you give me a thing that I can, zoom into and read the small text, that's Brendan catnip.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. So being able to do that for Skin Deep was a dream.
A lot of the labels had to be revised during development when the design of things changed, and Brendan would wave me over and be like, I need to put a paragraph of information into like 0% space. How do I do this? And it was really fun trying to figure out the like simplest, clearest, flat affect way to describe what was going on.
Yeah. because they're all very corporate as well, right? They're like airplane warnings, right, on everything.
Yeah. They got to feel like they're coming from a company. They have to be completely transparent about the mechanic. They have to be like completely unambiguous, which was really hard for a lot of them. We had to change a lot of the labels because we realized that they were phrased a little ambiguously and that they were making players do the wrong thing. They also had to be funny. So they benefit from using words that sound funny or using phrasings that sound funny and trying to find the place where all of those things combine is,
oh my gosh.
is kind of hard.
Yeah.
A lot of them benefited from just being totally straightforward.
Yeah. It's kind of hard, but in some ways it's easier because like once you have more rules and constraints of what it has to be, then it kind of like funnels you into doing a pretty specific thing sometimes.
The pods that you put the cats in, the original design of the game was that you put the skulls in the pods and you would collect the skulls and have to summon a pod and put the skulls inside. And I remember we went back and forth on the label on the outside of the skull pod for like months because it was so hard to explain, all right, collect skulls.
Collect people's heads.
The skulls in here.
This is a corporate mandate.
The reward you will get is this. You know, like it was. I remember you calling me over to like help rewrite that one like 5 times. But then when we changed it to deposit cats, now it just says deposit cats. That's all it needs to say. And it's a lot funnier and simpler because the design became clearer. That was a good label.
Yeah.
I remember when you changed it to deposit cats, I was like, oh, relief. This is so good. Deposit cat.
Yeah. Nice, understandable concept. Put a cat inside me. Done.
So let's talk a little bit about the focus on cats in this game, which is, again, just treated as straight down the line. This is how it is. All of the people that Nina talks to and interacts with are cats. All right, sure, that's fine. But why did you choose cats as like the primary characters, I guess, of this game? And then how did you shape the narrative and interactions and dialogue and things, or even mechanics, right? Collecting cats and saving them from these little boxes. How did cats, being like a really core central element of this game's identity, inform the narrative and mechanics of the game?
There's a hugely deep and profound design reason why they're cats, actually, which Brendon can now describe.
Yeah. So one reason was there were cats in previous Blendo games, and they kind of like come back for this title. But the other one that Laura's talking about is design-wise, we did not want the ambiguity of like who's a bad guy and who's a good guy in terms of gameplay. Of like, if I see the silhouette of a person, I gotta shoot him. But if I see a silhouette of a cat, they're my friend. And there's just makes it very clear. We didn't want it to be a challenge to identify who's a friend or a foe. That was like not part of the game that we wanted. So
these characters look completely different. You will never mix them up. And part of the reason we chose to do this was that earlier in development, the cats were going to be out in the ship more often. Okay. After you rescued them, they weren't only going to disappear until they go into the cat pod. There was a potential that they might walk around or they might be present in the environment. So like, I think in the movie Die Hard, the ambiguity between who is a friend and who is a foe is like a huge plot point, right? Like Bruce Willis doesn't know who to shoot, but that is not fun for the type of game we were making. So
sure.
Explicitly from the beginning, Brendon was like, these need to be cats so that you can like acquire targets faster. And I was like, okay, that makes absolute sense. The original motivation was purely design.
It makes sense on a mechanical level, but then once you, Laura, had the idea that it's got to be cats and cats are a major focus of it, how did you then shape the narrative and the world building around cats being a primary thing?
I think the idea that you were going to rescue cats was established long before I started thinking about what role the cats would have in the story. And then we were sort of thinking about like, who is Nina? What is her problem? Won't get into the spoiler stuff. We can discuss this afterwards. But Nina needs friends to help her through what she's going through. And I knew that the characters available to me were cats. So the cats were going to have to be her friends. So her friend group was going to have to be these cats. And then I was like, why does she know these cats so well if she's getting frozen all the time? Well, what's happening is she's being routinely frozen and she's saving the butts of this particular group of cats all the time because they're the clients of her insurance company. And so like through this sort of semi-professional interaction, these have become like her buddies. They're kind of her online pen pals. And we wanted Nina to have an arc where at the beginning of the game, she was very gruff and she was kind of like resisting emotional support from her friend group. And then by the end, she's become a little more open and she's willing to let these people help her. And then that culminates in a very cat-centric scene at the end of the story. The decision to make the people you're saving cats populated the game with like 10 to 12 characters that we like weren't using for anything else. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. Thematically, we can use a group of different people who send her messages as sort of like a vehicle for making the player feel like they've got a group of friends that Nina is slowly learning to let help her. Anyway, and then the spoilers side of it is that Nina is kind of like, but yeah, spoilers over.
Okay. I'm also curious if there's any sci-fi stories in terms of narrative or world building that you guys took inspiration from for creating the world of Skin Deep. It is very original and ridiculous, and there's nothing quite like it. But was there anything you were looking to for inspiration when coming up with anything in this game?
I think vibes-wise, we look at the movie Buckaroo Banzai a lot.
That's the most Brendon-coded movie that has ever happened. Yeah,
it's just a really wonderful movie. I think has a very like kind of similar overlapping vibes of kind of being very, very silly and very out of this world, but treating it very, very earnestly and very lovingly and unironically.
Completely earnest about like completely baffling people and ideas that it's kind of daring you to take seriously for the running time of the movie. And then also this willingness to like just say somewhat low effort crude jokes constantly throughout. Like
Sure.
One of the characters' names is like literally Big Booty, and they just keep saying that. And we didn't do anything quite like that in the game. We do have a soda called Pee-Poo in the game, but there's something very Looney Tunes about having characters be earnest and serious and then having them say something that's kind of like groan-worthy that sort of pushed us into the type of Looney Tunes space we wanted to be. We want the player to be laughing and groaning sometimes during this game.
Yeah, we were kind of aiming for having like a nice spectrum of emotions in the game. I think we didn't want it to just be one thing. We want little highs and lows. We want things that are sincere. We want things that are funny. We want things that are kind of scary. And there's something satisfying that makes it feel like more of a full meal, we think, when you do that.
We had a PowerPoint that we showed some of the outside writers to sort of like try and help get them into the same headspace as us with regards to like the tone and vibe of the story. And we did have a list of inspirations there, but I'm not sure that they were all really inspirations for us. They were more like touchstones that we could use to communicate the vibe that we were going for. And one of the things on there was like Chungking Express, like
okay, sure,
a movie about like longing where it's emotionally very. A lot of the games that Brendon has made are like they're about like really intense people who are feeling really, really intense emotions, and that's something else we were going for.
I mean, I think that's the thing with the Wong Kar-wai movies is that they always have like an interesting buffet of emotions going on in them. Like they are sad and melancholy, but there are parts that are like funny and like the characters have warmth to them, and they're not just one thing, which I think is something we always aim for.
Yeah, you're probably the first person to do Looney Tunes Wong Kar-wai.
I don't. Well, that's not really what we were trying to do. It's just more like, how do you communicate to other creatives that you want, like, that you're telling a story set in a world with snipers and hitmen and thieves, but also they're like, at home crying because they're like in love with someone who will never love them back. Like that. That's the kind of vibe of all the Blendo games.
Sure. Yeah. And then what about in terms of design? This being an immersive sim, is that a genre you are particularly passionate about? Do you have any favorite games in that genre that you might have looked to for design inspiration for a game like this? Also, it being something, as you mentioned, that on a design level is so different. I'm sure there were some things you had to learn from playing other games and experiencing that to then inform making something that was so different for you.
I play a lot of games, but immersive sims is one that I enjoy quite a lot. I grew up playing a lot of Thief 1 and 2, the old Looking Glass software game, and I think it's fantastic. I think it's this wonderful, pared down, really focused immersive sim game that I really, really hold in high esteem. I really loved Prey, the Arcane,
Oh
I believe,
yeah.
2017 game.
Oh man, that game is so.
To me, it's kind of the high
underrated.
water mark.
Oh my gosh.
Fulfills like the dream of immersive sim, I think, and having this contiguous world, having these objects that all interact in interesting ways, having you so many like things that feel like they should break the game, but just like make it more rich and complex, and it's a masterpiece, I think.
And Laura, is immersive sim a genre that you are a fan of as well?
Oh yeah, I was obsessed with Dishonored when it came out.
Sure. Yeah, me too.
I was thrilled to be able to work in this genre because not many people get a chance to, and this will be my one go at it for my life, I think. So I was thrilled to get an opportunity. It's very, very hard to make these games.
Let's talk about that. And you can take it from any angle you want. What was the hardest part about making a Skin Deep? What did you find the most challenging to sort of adapt to? And were like there things you got like super stuck on while you were making it?
Yeah, definitely a lot of challenges. One of them was that if you're making a single player game that depends on a lot of systems talking with each other, you kind of don't reach that point until pretty late in development,
Sure.
which
makes
is
sense.
kind of scary. Yeah. So like if you're making a game that has like very minimal and very focused on one mechanic, then you have something fun earlier in the development. But if you're depending on a long list of things that need to be online and working and working correctly and arted out and has audio work, you don't reach that until potentially pretty late.
It feels like you have nothing until it like all comes together. And then when it all comes together, it's doing all sorts of stuff you never predicted and that now you have to account for and mitigate.
Yeah, it's kind of like a tipping point of stuff. And then when you hit that tipping point, then it's like, oh, okay, this might be a real video game, incredible. Mm-hmm. But prior to that point, it's like, oh my god, is this going to work? Which is kind of...
We've heard that other ImSim teams had the same problem where you're just working and working and working and you can like test every part of the game independently, but you don't really know what it will or what it's supposed to like really feel like until you have a critical mass of these systems all together and affecting one another.
Yeah, so that was a tough one, and I'm super thankful for our team for pushing through all that, because it was definitely pretty tough to have like this weird half complete game for a very, very, very long time, and for it to finally come together at some point.
They take a long time to feel fun, and you're kind of like shitting yourself like, man, is this going to feel fun? And then when it finally does, it's an enormous relief.
Yeah. So how far into development do you think that was? Like when you realize like, okay, things are really starting to come together.
There's a time period, but it's kind of crazy how long it's
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if there's any like one specific date or like, when a flip was switched. It's kind of hard to say, but I'll say that it was like pretty late in development when you gotta like actually enter ship mode instead of add features mode, when you start to like wrap things up and realize, we got like tie up this loose end now. And so you tie it up and that kind of like links into something else, and you realize things kind of like start connecting together in fun ways when you start thinking about what you can do, and instead thinking about, we got to put this in front of strangers now and really make it, make it airtight.
There was a period of time in late summer and fall 2023 when the game suddenly started feeling like 20 times better than it had ever felt. In early 2023, Brendon could sit down at the game and like play it like a piano and make like insane stuff happen. But it was like late 2023 when other people started to be able to sit down and do that, and that was when we were like, oh phew, the game is good. Like sure. It was like scary late, because that was like less than a year and a half before ship, right?
Yeah, like there's so much things you need to do to ship a game, like wrap up the localization and the QA and get everything like set in stone so that other departments can step in and do stuff. So we needed to get the game done. We kind of all pulled together. One of the big moments was when I don't remember if it was either Suzanne or Tynan, but they had the idea of like, what if we just did not have guns for most of the mission, and then to unlock them at a certain phase during the mission. And that just made the game so much more interesting because there's something about having a gun where it just feels like the default thing that you'll always want to use because it is a thing that shoots out death orbs at people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also because it's what you're used to in video games. Is most first-person games, shooting is the primary interaction, and so I think our brains as gamers are trained to do that. But what I like about Skin Deep is that you try to always have your characters doing something weirder, something that's a little bit off the beaten path of just of shooting, right? And that not being the main thing. Of like, you place the toilets everywhere, you place the lighters everywhere, you place the bananas everywhere, you get some pepper, you're hiding in the rafters of all this nonsense, crawling under tables, and that's on a mechanical level a lot more different, frankly, than other games that you've played. And so I think that is definitely a key decision to make the game stand out.
It came down to a lot of like what might sound like unintuitive decisions to kind of make the game work.
And the final thing that I want to talk to you about is the little things in this game. The little interactions, the little decisions, the little design quirks, even the little narrative beats that most people might miss. Is there anything in this game that you're super proud of, you want to kind of make sure people notice while they're playing the game?
At the end of the game, there's a gigantic spinning fan blade that your character tries to walk towards, and we had to solve the design problem of not letting the player walk towards the fan and get chopped by it. Brendon and I were talking about it because there was a question from Suzanne, I think, about what was the most efficient way to handle this. And the way we handled it was the fan blade is blowing air at you so you can't walk towards it. And then so that you can see the air, so the player is not asking, why can't I walk towards this fan blade? There are little like $100 bills being blown through the fan at you. There's like little pieces of money so that you can see that there's air coming at you. And I remember we were talking about it. At first, it was like, this is impossible. Do we have to like change this whole thing? And it was like, no, we will make one change. We'll take Brendon's sketch of weird space money, and just like put it on the wind, and that will explain this. And then we don't have to change anything about this.
Right? Yeah, that is fun.
And it's like little decisions like that sort of like allow you to keep the work you've already done, and so that you don't have to like throw something in the trash. If you have an expansive attitude towards appropriate solutions, if you're willing to say things like, I can breathe in space, I have a third lung, and then like never talk about it again,
sure.
you can just solve problems that way. You can say whatever you want. It's made up. I really was pleased with how that one shook out, how the fan blade shook out.
Yeah.
You got any other stories like that, Brendon?
What's a fun little detail? The sink, when you squirt the little soap thing. So realistically, soap is not infinite. So I think we do clamp how much soap you get, but it's clamped at a ridiculous number of like 200 squirts or something. So
why even bother at that point, though?
It's a limitation that no gamer will ever see, but we think it's funny. That makes it funny.
No, you know what? That's a great point. It's because it implies that these things just hold a lot of soap. It's not like, you don't think of it on a design level. You think narratively, there's a shitload of soap in there, and that's just quirky in its own way.
Yeah.
I want to thank you both very much for joining me. I'm really happy we got to talk about the comedy in this game and the narrative and the mechanics and everything that went into creating it. I really had a great time playing the game. For everyone watching, I will leave a link to purchase the game on Steam in the description of the video. And any final thoughts that the two of you want to share before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that like we had this incredible team that was making this game, and I'm super privileged and grateful to have worked with them, because I think everyone was working at this really incredible level to make something really special.
Yeah. And also everybody should buy and review Skin Deep.
Yes.
Yeah, leave a Steam review if you want. That'd be great. We
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, we're okay with the shameless plug. I mean, that's what this whole video is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much both for joining me. And for everyone watching, I'll see you next time.
That you were going to be dealing with your evil clone. Funny thing is, I think you had already named the game Skin Deep by that point.
Yes.
So that sort of backfilled and created the thematic implications in the title Skin Deep. Is there similarity? Sure. Only Skin Deep. Who knows? Yeah, that was the first thing I pitched to you. Nina she's dealing with like her enemy is like her younger self. Her enemy is like who she used to be, right? And she feels a lot of like frustration and anger over like still being pursued by the decisions and the beliefs of her younger self, and the knowledge that like she used to be somebody who would not be proud of who she is now. And so I wanted Nina to have a group of friends who were like being nice to her and accepting her, and were like, you know, like we support you, Nina. Let's kill your clone. you know, like there's something very even if Nina has to learn to forgive her clone and for them to sort of understand one another and live together, and for her to sort of like synthesize these many different parts of herself and her personal history, she still needs like a group of buddies who are like, no, you are the right one. You stopped killing people. You're better. And she needed like a group of friends who would support her. So I was like, yeah, we got all these cats you're rescuing. That should be them.